Yeah, it just depends on the how much people want to yap.
And trust me, I do love to
Yeah.
yap.
I know. Listen, and I love to listen to you yap.
Well, good, good. We're gonna be perfect together.
Good. It's going to be phenomenal. Okay, listener, welcome to an episode of We Read It One Night. I am Allison Finch, your host, and I am so excited to be joined here today by Jen Prokop, romance reader and editor, co-host of Fate of Mates, and co-founder of the most important romance holiday in February,
Derek Craven Day.
Derek Craven Day.
So obviously, I think everybody will be like, well, I guess they're going to be talking about Dreaming of You. And you know what? You deserve nice things, and so do I. Yeah. So it's perfect.
Yes. Yeah. And I was thinking about, I was like, I think this is going to be our this podcast's sixth Lisa Kleypas episode. And I think that officially makes her like the most,
yeah.
The one that we've talked about.
It's so funny because it's like, I think that, well, listen, she obviously is. Although I have not read every Lisa Kleypas book. I was talking to somebody the other day. I've completely put the entire Hathaway series in the vault.
Mm-hmm.
Although I thought I read Cam's book, but now I'm like, maybe I haven't. That's like the first one. And part of me is, I keep saying, well, like, I would just want to know that they're there for me one day when I need them in case times are tough. And someone's like, times are tough. And I was like, okay, good point. But I'm busy. So they're going to have to, those Hathaways are going to have to wait.
Yeah. That's how I feel about Beverly Jenkins.
Yes. Like, good to have some that are good to have some that you can put in bubble wrap, for later. Yeah. I feel like this is the romance equivalent of like putting like a plastic slip cover over the sofa. You want to look at it on your shelf. You want to know that Beverly Jenkins is there for you. Yeah. But you also know that one day you're going to, just need to bust into those. So
take off the slip cover and take a nice nap.
Take a nice nap with the Levesque family or whatever. So.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah. Well, and it's listen, that is also easier to do when people have a really big backlist, right?
Right. I mean, exactly.
Lisa and Bev have both been writing historical romance for 30 years now. And so there's a lot of books out there, and that's a good feeling, right?
Yeah. And they're still writing. We still get more of them every year.
Bless, right? Bless.
Right. They said we're the heroes that you need right now.
Exactly.
That's true. Not the heroes we deserve, but the ones
heroes
that we
need. Yes, absolutely.
The ones we need.
Well, and I love historical romance so much. And I feel like it's such a, back in the day, if you were a person of a certain age, historical romance was where it was at. That's all there was. It's not all that existed, but it was, I think, like in terms of like the big books as opposed to category, they were all historical.
Yeah. And I mean, even looking back, like someone like my age, like the Bodice Ripper, you think of Fabio on a pirate ship.
Sure, on a pirate ship, exactly. And so those books are so foundational to romance itself that it is hard not to, I don't know, like I'm very, but you know what, so it's interesting. Okay, I reread one of the reasons, like we'd sort of agreed a while ago to do this, and I was like, I'm going to need some time to reread. And then, of course, when did I reread it? In the past 48 hours, which is fine.
Same.
No problem. It's fresh. But one of the things I was really thinking about, and I didn't go back, like we did an episode on Dreaming of You in our like second season. We constantly reference it. But, I don't reread it in its entirety all that often, because part of me is like wants to, I guess it's also a little in plastic, right? It's also a little, locked in.
Yeah.
And but one of the reasons I think it's such a rewarding text is I find that it always speaks to like the moment I'm in, the moment we're in. And so in particular this time around, I was like sort of noticing things in the book that I don't think would have like noticed in the same way if it was not right now. And so I think that's another reason, a great historical I mean, one of the things people really, if you're new to romance, if you're not sure if historical is for you, one of the things I would say is like historical romance is not historical fiction, right? It's going to
Hmm.
tell you something about now way more than it is going to tell you something about
Right.
like 1820s London. I mean, you might, pick up a
Right.
few things, but the whole goal is not for to accurately be reporting on history. It's to be accurately reporting on like what it means to be
Right.
human.
Yeah, exactly. It's the human,
Yeah,
it's the human emotions. Yeah.
right.
And this was like the first time I read Dreaming of You with a sort of not like a critical eye, but like
Yeah.
I put on my English major hat back
Yes.
on and
Right.
really because usually I'm just kind of like, I'm just here for the feelings. I'm here for the vibes. I'm here
Right.
for
Right.
Eric Craven stealing her spectacles and
Mm.
like absolutely like losing it every time he sees Sarah and that's
Yes.
it. But like
Right.
now I was, kind of thinking about how this works as a romance novel and why it's such a pivotal text. I like to
Yeah.
talk about in this podcast, like it's called We Read It One
Right.
Night. I like to sort of explore like what it is about romance that makes us want to stay up all night reading, that like
Right.
grips us and doesn't let us go. And this is such Dreaming of You is such a
Yeah.
like it's one of the
Right.
texts that like and
Yeah.
it's so broad in its appeal. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
there are very few people who are like, yeah, I read Dreaming of You and it sucks. I don't get the hype.
Right.
You know?
And you know what? Listen, by the way, fine if you do. I think one of the things I will say, like before we sort of dive in,
Yeah.
is because I do think that's a really interesting question. And we just were very lucky enough to have Lisa on Fated Mates for Derek
Yes.
Craven Day and
Loved that
have her
episode.
sort of talk about this. So like some of this we can kind of review for people. But I think that in some ways, like, so this book was published, I think, in 1994 and 1995. There's like
Mhm.
a really, like, kind of hard to read thread of this book where there's an ex-lover of Derek's who's like
Yes.
the bad guy. And we can talk a little bit more about that, about Joyce is her name as we sort
Hmm.
of get into it. But I would say, like, when you read Dreaming of You, it is like that thread more than any other one that really makes you realize like kind of how much romance has changed. Like nobody would
Yeah.
write this plot now. And so, if it just like I guess I'm not I guess I would say like I consider that content warning worthy, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of slut shaming, and I would also say, frankly, in the age of like Epstein, some really interesting and hard thoughts about like what it means that we've lived in society for a long time where young girls were seen as like sort
Yeah.
of disposable to older gross men. And Joyce is a
Yes.
real victim in the book when you
Yes.
read it, but it is in some ways she is seen as the book itself essentially presents her as kind of almost like too far gone to be saved. And it's really
Right.
a pretty
Exactly.
hard part of the read. So we don't have to like say a lot. I know I like led with that, but I do think it's important to like sort of name that, right?
Yeah. I do think like I mean to give the book credit, like there are several very small moments in which Sarah and which Derek and which other
Yes.
characters are like what would it like she was Joyce, this character is married to
Yes.
her old ass husband
Yeah.
when she was 15. She was
Yes.
a
Yes.
baby.
Right.
And that experience, that trauma is like what makes her what she is in the book. And there is a very
Yeah.
small through line of empathy. But
Sure.
then like you said, it's sort of presented of like, well, yes, she's a victim, but she's unreformable.
Frankly, I think like the best reading, like English major wise, right, is that she's like a foil for Derek, right? Both
Right.
of them were essentially like run through the ringer of like a colonialist, patriarchal, like, right, like kind of
Right.
violently, like sort of capitalist society, and then like came out different ways. And what we are like meant to understand is that, right, like Sarah's love and Derek's love for Lily and Alex, right, who are like the
Hmm.
kind of his only friends and
Right.
worthy, have made him redeemable in a way that like Joyce was never found anyone to feel about her that way, right? So the most sort of charitable reading of this is that like he could have been Joyce, she could have been
Right.
him, and instead it turned out the other way.
Hmm.
I think that that's a fair reading, but I don't think it makes it, like I said, especially like I said, reading it in like the Epstein era, it is
Yeah.
incredibly difficult to sort of see that kind of presented as like, oh well, and I
Yeah.
don't think it was that cavalier, but
Yeah.
I would not actually also blame a single soul who looks at it and says it felt that way to me. Fair,
Right. Yeah,
right?
absolutely. There are definitely parts of it that make you uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And I do think also to that point, reading it in an era of wealth, the wealth gap is growing
sure.
and
Yes.
billionaires are
Yeah.
increasing. There is an element of it's the discussion of class throughout this
Yes.
entire book is nuanced in depth, and I do want
Yeah.
to talk about that. But I think that there also is an element with Joyce, particularly, that sort of signals how like the aristocracy in itself is corrupting,
Yes.
and
Oh yeah.
how part of the reason that her and Derek are different is because Derek is he's
Yes.
outside that world, and
Right.
like, you know what I
Right.
mean? So he is able to escape the trappings of wealth in a way that
Right.
Joyce can't, because it's so steeped in who she is.
Right. Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. And I think so yeah, I mean, and that to me is like what makes this such a like fascinating book, right? And so one
Hmm.
of the things like Lisa talked about when we had her on the podcast was that Derek Craven, so if you read the previous book with Lily and Alex, right? Derek is sort of this kind of very ancillary, kind of secondary character, a friend of Lily's, someone she kind of knows from, a different time in her life. And Lisa sort of said, like, and, at this time, you have to understand that, like, in this kind of romance, there were category romances with like working class people or regular people,
Hmm.
but there was not really, right? So, I mean, there was like love sweps and things like that in the
Yeah.
80s that were really like, like I'm a regular person. But in these kinds of books, it was always, always about the aristocracy. And so Derek
Hmm.
Craven being a hero, right, was really like a big innovation
Yeah.
in historical romance at that time. Like, right, having somebody say, what we're going to do is we are going to like kind of put down someone on page who is not an aristocrat, and then not have it be that they end up as one, right? Which was
Yeah, the
was
secret
something, right?
aristocrat.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. So you think you're poor, but really you're the only son of the duke, and by the end you will essentially rise into that position.
Hmm.
So, in that sense, and then Sarah herself is also a country bumpkin. Someone,
Right.
Joyce calls her at one point, right? Has made has a really interesting background. She has elderly parents, I'm sure. But
Hmm.
they said like, right, we got pregnant essentially long after we thought that was possible. So I sort of assumed that they were in their 40s potentially, like,
Right. Yeah.
right, which would have been probably pretty fucking wild back in the day.
Yeah.
And so she's like 25, so they're in their 60s, and she has a very unorthodox upbringing because of that. And then she's also this famous novelist, S.R. Fielding, who has
Yes.
written this book, Matilda, that is, essentially the talk of London. And everywhere
Yeah.
she goes, people either think she's her or refuse to believe that Matilda doesn't really exist. So
Right.
they are both really, I don't know, they're both, neither of them are aristocrats, have any ties to it, and the goal
Hmm.
of the book is not for them to end up that way. And
Hmm.
in fact, what Derek does is he runs a gambling hall and loves to strip those idiots of their money,
Yeah.
right?
Right. And that's how they meet initially, is
Right.
because Sarah comes to London to research her next book because
Right.
some fop in her town inherited a bunch of money and like it was a squire or something like
Right.
that, and went to Craven's and lost it all
Yeah.
because of gambling, which is, I don't want to make light of gambling as an addiction and as a
Right.
problem, but and so Sarah's like, I wanted to come and I wanted to see Cravens and see what
Right.
made him lose it all at your gambling
Right.
tables. And Derek is like, she's like, don't you feel bad about that? That you're like ruining people's lives? And Derek is like, that's not my problem. He's like, I'm
Right.
not ruining their lives. They make that decision on
Right.
their own.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, I deserve to ruin their lives, even if I do.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's interesting. Even her father at the end, when they meet, says, well, I guess I don't like drinking, but I don't blame the local barman, right?
Hmm.
Like it's like a real sense of, well, you don't ever have to walk into those places. So if you do, essentially that's on you. But I will say
Right.
again, like back to this being like such a rich text about our time, right? Like the problem of gambling on your phone is no small
Right.
thing. And right, like sort of the idea that like gambling is just like a lark, but look at how it literally ruins people's lives and
Right.
causes an
Exactly.
incredible amount of violence towards like essentially if like there's huge spikes, for example, in like violence after like big sporting events where a lot of people have lost
Yeah.
a lot of money. And, so it is really interesting to sort of read that and be like, okay, but also you could physically, right? That boy, once he's back in Greenwood Corners, does not have access to Cravens anymore. If it is on your phone, hooked up to your
Right.
bank accounts and credit cards,
Right.
you can drain yourself dry no matter where you are,
Right.
right?
And they're advertising it at the Super Bowl and,
Oh, everywhere,
like,
right?
yeah. And then
Yeah.
particularly when you think about how, you talk about how there's like this surge of violence after major
Hmm.
sporting events and stuff. And today, that also connects back to the book that like there is like this through line of violence against women.
Yeah.
And, Cravens is kind of like a little bit more
Sure.
feminist, I guess, because
Yes.
like
Right. A little more
he
woke.
respects the house wenches and
Yes.
all
Right.
of that. But
He
then
doesn't
like,
profit off of them. He's like,
right.
it's your money. I'll just provide you these places. Right. Like, and that's always, that's a real romance classic in some ways
Yeah.
too, which, you know what? Fine. I mean, I think there's ways that you want to signal to your reader. Right. Like this, again, this isn't historically accurate. I'm not interested.
Right.
This is like a thing I can tell you that you now like kind of don't have to worry about it. Right. These men,
Right.
breaking themselves on at the table, hazard tables is our concern, not women and what they're doing with these men afterwards. So,
Right. Exactly. I
yeah.
mean, it's the same thing with like, I like to say with like mafia romance when I
Oh,
describe
yeah.
like darker mafia romance to people. I'm like, listen, they may be human traffickers, but they draw the line at children. You
Of
know what I mean? Like
course, there's always a
there's
line,
like
right?
a line
Yeah.
of like they may be bad, but they don't do this. And
Yeah.
that's why it's okay.
Yeah. It's interesting because there was this really interesting article in like New York Magazine earlier this week. I don't know if you saw it, and it was about okay, everybody. Before I say this crazy thing, I'm going to say you have to understand that like everything I ever input into my brain essentially almost always filters through like the romance brain, right?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm constantly like, what is this telling me about romance? Because one of the things I really believe about romance is that it is really the thing that's fascinating to me about romance, and maybe this is true of all fiction at some level, but whatever the romance way is most interesting to me, it's always in conversation about like where we are as a society and like what are the stresses and strains on our interpersonal relationships versus
Hmm.
not. And in particular, as a woman reading romance, I'm really interested in what that has to say about like the current state of the patriarchy.
Right.
And I think that this book is doing a lot of that work as well. So that's like no mistake that that's one of my favorites. But in this New York Magazine article from earlier this week, it was like a story about a woman who essentially was like a mega influencer. And then she
Hmm.
like sort of realized like,
Yeah.
oh, they really mean they hate women. Like
Right.
they were using her essentially as her like takeaway from this, as opposed
Right.
to, you're a garbage human. I mean, so it was very much, and I was fascinated by the framing of it, right? Like the ways that white women always get to sort of pretend to be innocent, right? Even
Right.
when they have done harm, right? All that stuff. But there was
Right.
this one really interesting part where it basically talked about like, if you look back at like kind of second wave feminists, like, they would rail against like sort of like men, but there was this understanding or belief that like women who like kind of cozied up to the patriarchy would in fact reap the one reward, which was like
Hmm.
personal protection, right?
Yeah.
Like there is going to be a way that this man, I am sort of like tying myself to, at the very least,
Yeah.
will look out for me.
Yeah.
And that all of that is now gone, right? Like they're ready to take our right to vote away. They
Right.
are
Yeah.
actively fucking working on that right now, right?
Yeah.
They have, right, like abortion is right, all of the things, our
Yeah.
bodily autonomy, our rights to vote, like they are really looking to put us back hundreds of fucking years.
Yeah.
And I read this one part and I thought, what's really fascinating about it to me is I thought, like, well, isn't that what dark romance is kind of promising in some ways? Like, sort of thematically,
Mhm.
like, this man will be bad everywhere else in the world, but he will, in fact, do whatever it takes to protect you. And so I did. I found myself really thinking, like, dark romance being in sort of conversation with the idea of like,
Yes.
what does it mean to like exist in a hyper patriarchal world? And then like, what is it that you can get out of it if you're willing to tie yourself to someone who profits from it greatly, right?
Yeah.
And I think in this case, like, I don't think in Dreaming of You that's exactly true because I think Derek is outside of that in some ways,
Hmm.
right? Or at least he's risen past it, right? He might have had to like do whatever it took to get there, but
Right.
now he does not want to be part of that class. What he
Yeah.
just wants is to profiteer off of them.
Right. But then
Yeah.
he also like explicitly gives back and like
Yes.
protect, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's not pulling the ladder up behind
Right.
him.
Right.
He does actively, not just like throwing his money around, but, like
Yeah.
he's involved in politics and he's trying to
Right.
get bills passed to like protect.
These boys who are the chimney sweeps and
Right.
whatever, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, he's doing it all secretly because he
Right.
doesn't want anyone to know that
Right.
he's like a softie.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's really interesting. So I mean, he's a really interesting character. And
Hmm.
I think the thing about I feel like the assumption, I guess, at this point I'm saying is we're not gonna like review the plot, right? People are just like, we've read it.
Yeah.
I'm like, sorry, everybody. But I think the thing I was also really fascinated by, though, through in this read was, and listen, we've all had this experience when you're reading a book where you have like two characters, right? And you kind of really feel that the book belongs to one of them.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
did find myself, and I think this is in many ways like Derek's book, right?
Yeah.
He is like fascinating character who is really, I don't know, he crackles on the page,
Yeah.
right?
And he's the one that changes. Like
Yes.
Sarah really, for the most part, is exactly who she's meant to be at the
Yes.
beginning of the book. She
Yes.
has like minor interpersonal things where she finally throws off the shackles of Perry, her,
Right. Right.
ex-boyfriend. But
Yeah.
overall, like she's still like and I would like to talk about the beginning because I think like literally I listened to the audiobook and like the
Oh yeah.
first 5 minutes,
Yeah.
not even an exaggeration, are like tell you everything you need to know
Yeah.
about these characters and about Sarah. And like
Yeah.
within the first 5-10 minutes, like she's shot a man.
Yeah. And like really doesn't, she's like, that happened. It's not like
Yeah.
she is all torn up about it, right?
Yeah.
Romance, murder. No one ever has
No,
to
it's
feel
fine.
sorry,
It was an
right?
accident. She's like she just got really bad aim and she accidentally shot a guy.
I will say, what's really funny is, I don't know, I don't know if everybody, I also love, like, I read a lot of genre fiction and I love these Jack Reacher books. And Jack Reacher is like a crazy, knows
Yeah.
everything there is to know about guns. And I don't know how accurate this is, but I do believe Jack Reacher really knows about guns, or at least that Lee Child does a lot of fucking research about guns.
Yeah.
And there was like a book, one of the books once he was talking about how, like, the idea of like aiming like with an old-timey gun is
Yeah.
like a hilarious pipe dream. They just
Right.
they were not built for that. So she could have the best aim in the fucking world and still have shot that guy in the throat. Like
Right.
that's just how those guns were.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I will say, I don't, like now I read scenes like that where someone, like, I mean, the whole idea of dueling, I'm like, listen, you know what was saving you? Your
Insane.
guns could not do what like a modern pistol can do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But she does. She shoots the guy
Yeah.
because they're attacking. Well, she doesn't know it's Sarah Craven at that time, right?
Right. Can I just say, just like as an aside,
Yeah.
so I've like wanted to have you on the podcast for a while. And like when I know you like Reacher and I
Oh,
haven't
yeah.
read the books, but I love the
The
show.
show.
And I was like, how can I get Jen to come on my romance podcast? And we just end up talking about
I
Reacher.
made it happen. I'm always happy to talk
Right.
about
You're always
Reacher.
like, I will
Yeah.
talk about Reacher, even if you don't want me to talk about Reacher. And that's great.
Reacher's great. Yeah, the
Yeah.
books are great. You should read
Yeah.
some of them. They're good. And they're good in
Yeah.
audio, by the way.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But yeah, about and then Sarah, when she's
Yeah.
helping Derek Craven back to Craven's, like get him medical attention, having just killed a man, she's like networking. She's like, "Oh
Yes.
my God, you're Derek Craven? Can I do research?" Like, and
Funny you
he's like,
should say
"I'm
that.
bleeding to death here." Like, I'm like, "What?"
Right. And at one point he even like is like, who is this like chatterbox? Like what is this woman just like talking at me? This talkative little stranger, I think he calls her.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it is like really the case that he has literally like never met anyone like her.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Never. Yeah.
And so he first sees her, and this is like the first 5 minutes of the book. He sees her, he's like, that is a woman. She doesn't look like a sex worker. I don't recognize her, and I know everyone around here. Like, has she gotten lost? Like, whatever.
Right.
And he feels the like thread of empathy, but then he's like, that's none of my business. Also,
Right.
sometimes like people use women as like honey traps for
Yes.
robberies. So like he's like, so you establish Derek as this like worldly person, as
Hmm.
but also as like a deeply pragmatic person, but also as
Yes.
someone who does have a thread of empathy. And then his journey throughout the book is
Yeah.
Sarah like
Pulling
yanking
that
that
out of
thread of
him.
empathy out
Right.
with her
Right.
bare hands.
Because he's just learned to ruthlessly
Yeah.
quash it whenever it appears, right? It's
Yeah.
like whoosh. And, then at the end, he just has no more defenses against her, which is my favorite thing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, it is. It's great. I think it's also, so then what happens, right? When they get to Craven's,
Mhm.
is, she sort of meets the like motley crew of
Yeah.
like sort of housemaids and the sex workers and Worthy, who's his factotum, and the chef and the
Yeah.
doorman. And the thing that is like sort of and this is another thing I would have never really thought about, except I did this time, is so she, introduces herself as like Sarah Fielding, and someone
Mhm.
sort of like, I don't suppose you have any any
Yeah.
relationship to the author. And she's, kind of flattered, like, actually,
Mm.
I'm the author. And immediately, what everybody wants to know is like, oh my God, tell us about Matilda, right?
Yeah.
Matilda is this like her superstar creation. And, Matilda is a sex worker, and sort of the end of the book essentially apparently is like standing on the bridge, deciding what to do. Is she
Yeah.
going to, turn back and live a Christian life or whatever,
Yeah.
right? Or is she going to jump off and just sort of like end her life? Like there's like
Right.
these are her two choices. And one of the things, okay, this is really funny. So the whole entire book, it is almost like a running gag
Yeah.
that no one believes her that Matilda is something she made up,
Yeah.
right? People be like, "Are you kidding? I saw her last week on Bond Street," or like, "My cousin knows her." I mean, like, sort of
Yeah.
this like nonstop. Now, meanwhile, Derek is not a reader. He's essentially like he's very good with numbers, but potentially he might be
Mhm.
functionally illiterate, right? He can like
Right.
scratch out some words that are related to the business only. This man is not a reader. So, of
Hmm.
all the people in the book that ever ask her questions about Matilda, Derek Craven never does. He's simply not interested in Matilda. But the thing I kept thinking about this time is, this is just basically like fandom. And the reason I say this is we are kind of in heated rivalry fever still,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And the way, and listen, I understand like falling into a book and feeling consumed by
Oh,
characters,
yeah.
but I think our proximity to like the actors, the showrunners, right? Like
Yeah.
essentially like really give, I mean, listen, I think that there are ways this is healthy, and then obviously clearly there are ways this is toxic.
Yeah. Some people don't know fandom etiquette. They need
Yeah, but
to.
I mean, but also like I don't think it's etiquette. Like I think that this is like the modern day person who just really doesn't want to believe that Matilda's not real. Right?
Mhm.
Like I really found myself kind of fascinated by thinking like, these are people who are like, I know these, because I know these characters or I've seen the work that's been made. Right, like that parasocial nature of like sort of our
Hmm.
modern life. And this is it again, not just in hot, in heated rivalry, but like sort of across, there's the sense of like, because a person is on a podcast or
Yeah.
right on a TV show or writes books and is on social media and I've interacted with them, I know them.
Yeah.
And I really found myself thinking, like, I've never in my life thought about that before. But when I was reading about the way people flatly refuse to believe that Matilda is made up, they want to believe in Matilda, right?
Right. Right.
And I think that's because she captured something again about like something really real about what it means to be human. Like, that's what the best stories
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. I've never thought of like the fandom, like modern interpretation of fandom aspect, like not even when
Yeah.
I was reading it this time. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense and is really interesting in terms of like especially like how we treat authors
Yeah.
on the internet and
Right.
in person. And I just feel like every other day there's like another horror story of an author
Another
being
horror story.
like,
Yeah. Right.
people did this at a signing or like
Yes.
people bullying authors off the internet, like, you know.
Right, right. And I think like that's because there's like this real sense of, and I'm sort of fascinated by what the book has to say about this, right? This like real sense that we think we own public figures in some way. And
Mhm.
one of the things at the end of the book that's like really fascinating is that like Sarah and Derek, by not caring at all what people think about them,
Yeah.
managed to like earn the approval of the aristocracy and of the town
Yeah.
because they don't care, right? That's something about like our hunger for being seen is like repellent to people, but our disdain of being seen is like attractive. And I just found myself really thinking a lot this time. And I will say I've read this book a million times, or at
Yeah.
least parts of it, and never really thought before about the Matilda of it all, right?
Yeah.
And I just think that's fascinating because, of course, Sarah can then walk around London and people won't know who she is. Derek can walk
Right.
around London and, like, right. But, like, in our modern world, if you're Hudson Williams or Connor Story or, right, somebody with that kind of profile, there's
Hmm.
like it's almost like people think, well, you don't deserve privacy. You're the one who wanted to be an actor. And I just
Right.
feel like truly that I don't think that's true.
It's not how that, yeah,
It's
that's
not
not
how
how
that,
that works.
and it might be how it is working for them. I'm sure it must be really hard, but I'm sort of fascinated by I found myself really interested this time around in Matilda, right?
Yeah.
As like what that's telling us about how we feel about
Yeah.
people. Yeah.
But then there's also this like I feel like modern sentiment, I think particularly among Gen Z and Gen Alpha,
Mhm.
that it's, quote unquote cringe
Yeah.
to care about things and it's cringe to like things. And so you
Yeah.
have those two like conflicting
Right.
forces of this extreme
Yes.
extent to way fandom is blurring the lines between reality and fiction, but then also
Yeah.
this disdain for people who care, not even
Yeah.
in a fandom context, but just like care in
Yes.
general.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, I don't know. That's hard, right? It's hard. But I think that's the thing about romance. Like romance is always about feelings. I mean, right, you said
Yeah.
that at the beginning. Like you can read any book with a critical lens, but like at the end of the day, romance works or doesn't for me based on my feelings, right? Like
Mhm.
the goal of a good romance is like to make you feel something.
Yeah.
And it's great. I obviously that's going to happen because the characters feel things, but over and over again in this book, even still, even having read it as many times as I have, like the way I am sort of delighted and or appalled or like completely drawn in at like certain moments is what makes this like a really like one of my all-time favorites, right? And so I think that's the part, right? Like watching Derek essentially do everything he can to, I'm not good enough for her and, like I'm not going to ruin her or her
Mhm.
life and then just not being able really at the end of the day to resist. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the stuff,
I
right?
love a man who's like, I can't
Yeah.
get my grubby mitts all over your
Oh,
like pure,
one.
beautiful, ethereal self.
She's so perfect. She's an angel. I'm not worthy. You are correct. You are not.
Right. I think that's frankly that's how all men should be
Yeah,
thinking.
right.
Like you're right,
Agree.
actually.
I think one of the things that like Lisa Kleypas does is like, and every single one of her books, I think, has this like vibe. And sometimes it is like stated explicitly or not. And I think in some version or another, maybe it is in every book.
Mhm.
And so in this one, it's essentially like, I think Alex or Lily essentially says to him, like, if no man is good enough for her, essentially it might as well be you,
Yeah.
right? In marrying Winterbourne, Winterbourne flatly
Yes.
says, no man is good enough for her, so it might as well be
Yes.
me. And I do think that that is something that, like, I think that's why Lisa's books always hit
Yeah.
because she understands that there is like this sense that they're like, I am a garbage human, but all the other men are garbage too. So I might as well be me because at least I
Yeah.
will lay down my fucking life for her. Amen.
Right.
Right?
Exactly. I'm glad you brought up Winterborn because I feel like so Winterborn is my favorite clay
Yeah.
boss. I'm a not 5 fucking minutes girly,
Oh
like
yeah. I
to the
love
end of
that one.
time.
I love it.
I love it. And I rereading Dreaming of You this time, and I think it's because like I've reread, or at least my favorite parts of Winterborn, which is like
Yeah.
80% of that book anyway. Um,
Fair.
fairly recently. There's so many parallels. There's so
Yes.
many where Lisa was like, you know what? This
Yeah.
hit so hard in Dreaming of You.
Right.
I'm going to show the what 30 years
Yes. Right.
between these two books, and I'm going to
Probably 20 some.
show
Yeah.
right how much it still works. I mean, like you
Yeah.
said, Winterborn being like nobody's good enough for you, so like it might as well be me, and then him with Helen being like okay, being reluctant to marry her, but then as soon as he's
Yes.
locked in and he's like, I'm
Yes.
going to compromise you and we're going to elope tomorrow. And
Right.
Jarek does the same thing to Sarah. He's like, all right, now that we're in it, like, I have to make sure that you can't leave ever
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just like so many, and even just, and I know that you've talked about this on Fated Mates, and I know you talked about this with like Lisa Kleypas, like how Derek Craven is the primordial KLEYPAS hero, the
Right.
working class hero, and so Winterborn is also a working class hero, and how Lisa especially kind of creates these men who are brilliant,
Mm-hmm.
right? And Tom
Yes.
Severin is like
Tom
this. Like there's
Severin.
so
Right.
many that are like who are brilliant, but ultimately they're love interests, even if they don't have, the business acumen or the math or, the
Right.
train empire.
Train
They
Empire.
are smarter than them. Like I feel like
Yeah.
the implication is that like these women are like because they know
Yes.
about people. Like okay,
Yes.
maybe they don't know about industry or they don't know how to count cards,
Right.
but
Right.
they understand people and that's why they will always
Yeah.
I don't know, be able to control their man. Like I don't like
Yeah.
that's a
Right.
very
Right.
like derivative
No,
way of
but
putting it,
or
but
right, but I mean, and I do. I think one of the things that's also really interesting is, and I mean, again, I typically, and maybe it's just because it sounds like you and I have this in common. I'm like really a scene rereader, right? So I
yeah.
will reread my favorite parts of a book over and over again, but don't often reread a book in its entirety, right?
Yeah.
And so I do, I guess that's one of the reasons I like listening to some of my favorite books in audio, right? Because
Hmm.
then I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to really experience the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that's done like really interesting when you think about like all those characters, right? Severin and Winterbourne, to like then you have like sort of I don't know, you have Matthew Bronson, for example, right? Like these
Hmm.
are men who came from nothing and made themselves rich. And then you have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then you have the aristocrats who have titles but no money, right?
Yeah.
Devon and West and
Yeah.
St. Vincent, right? And like you sort of have like this group of them. But like the big change that sort of happened is I think like and you see this in this book is
Hmm.
the external threat presented by Joyce is essentially the external threat in Winterborn presented by Albion Vance, right? Or the external threat in Chasing Cassandra of like that dirtbag who
Right.
wants to, right, that kid or whatever who is essentially trying to force, and then,
Yeah. And his
you know,
dad.
and his
Yeah.
dad, his evil dad. And I do think that there is then like sort of a real like through line in Lisa's books, and certainly in this one, that one of the things that keeps people apart is though that even though they don't see them like right, Derek Craven sees himself as largely existing outside society, but
Mhm.
Sarah can doesn't really have that. Even though he sees from the beginning that she does not think of herself that way, he still understands that there are rules for women that there are not for him, and
Right.
that he believes at some level that she must kind of want that, right? And I think that's why in this book the presence of Perry is so interesting, right? Because what
Mhm.
Perry literally wants is like it's like Tradwife 1995's version, right? I mean,
Right.
flatly is what he says, right? Like,
Right.
well, you're going to put up with my shitty mom and she's going to be terrible to you and you're never going to do anything right and we're going to have to live with her because that's what she wants, and like I'm tied to her apron strings, but essentially the big thing is that he wants her to stop writing,
Yeah.
right? He wants her to stop writing because you're going to have a household and children, and that's going to be enough for you. And again, it was really kind of wild to read this book and understand that, like, Sarah's rejection of that, her flat rejection of that,
Mhm.
is kind of because of who she is as a writer, because of the world she has outside the home. And at the end of the book, when Derek finally essentially asks her father, for her hand or whatever, he says something like, "I'm not an idiot though, right? I don't deserve her, but I'm not an idiot, and I would never make her give up her writing or any other
Yeah.
projects she wants for herself."
Yeah.
Right? And I think like this to me is really like what romance should, right? Like if you're going to read like a straight romance about the patriarchy, this better be where it fucking lands, right?
Right.
This better be where it fucking lands. Like you get to decide the life you want for yourself.
Yeah.
And by doing that, she kind of frees him from it too.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's I again sort of clued into this time is, you know, small town romance is sort of ascendant again. Like,
Right.
listen, there's a lot of things in romance that are very conservative coded, right? And one of
Right.
them, and listen, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not talking like capital C conservative, like Republican. I'm talking small C
Yeah.
conservative, right? It's about
Yeah.
home and it's about families and it's about, right? Like those are kind of the places romance exists. But I think it's really interesting because I spent a lot of time really fascinated by like Sarah's return home, and
Mhm.
how in like a modern small town romance still like to this fucking day, and it shocks me, the city is like bad and wrong,
Yeah.
and if only you could like just go back to your small town and fall in love with this baker who somehow is keeping his this
Christmas cookie
yes
industry
it's
alive year
right,
round.
year round, it's fine. Sarah goes back to Greenwood Corners and it is hard for her to admit, I love my parents, but this I am bigger than this now.
Yeah.
And London is the place everyone in town is like, "Oh, you're back from terrible London. It's evil and
Right.
wrong and bad." And she's like, "I cannot fucking wait to go back there."
Yeah.
Right? That is where my happiness lies. That is where my future is. And I found
Yeah.
myself thinking like, why don't I ever think about this book as being essentially the anti small
Yeah.
town romance in that way? Right?
Yeah. Yeah, like Derek in the small town romance formula, Derek is the big city boyfriend that she
Yes.
leaves behind for her childhood love.
Yeah, finds happiness with Perry, who just wants to have kids and a family, right? And
Yeah.
now I'm like, no, but it's all like, listen, I'm sorry, everybody, if you're living in a small town, it's fine. But I'm just saying, like, the
Yeah.
formula of these stories is often, right, like sort of the kind of more gentle narrative of like, New York and Chicago are just crime infested holes. Like, well,
Right.
I live here and it's fucking great,
Yeah.
right? Everybody, Chicago is fucking great. So I was really fascinated by Sarah's journey and
Yeah.
her really understanding, like, if I had married Perry before I ever started writing, I would have been happy. I would
Mhm.
have. I mean, maybe things with his mom wouldn't have been great, but I would not have known that there were other options for me.
Mhm.
And it is by going out there and like writing and living this life and doing research and meeting people different than me that I found a world for myself that's going to make me so much happier and a man who will appreciate and love that I write and whatever other project
Yeah.
I want to do. He is down
Yeah.
for it.
And who will turn the world upside down to make it happen for me. Like if
Yeah,
I want to do something, he
right.
will do whatever he can to support that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
But talking about like reading again within like the context of like the world
Yes.
we're living in, this book having such a powerful of like, yes, reading and particularly reading outside of your own experience. Like, you know what I mean? Like Sarah's not writing
Mm-hmm.
Jane
Mm-hmm.
Austen and I love my girl Jane, but like
Right.
that would Sarah if Sarah wrote Jane Austen's, Pride and Prejudice, she would be staying very much within her personal wheelhouse. But then
Right. Right.
choosing to write about a sex worker, choosing to then write about a gambler, choosing to write
Right.
about a like she is experiencing the world outside of her own experience
Yeah.
and she is so inherently empathetic and curious
Right.
that she is willing to like look at people who are living differently than her and who have different, you know, perspectives than her and say like okay like here let me like dig the value out of this
Right.
and let me
Right.
show that there is value in this way and
Yeah.
that with book bans everywhere it's like
Yes. Yes. Right.
people
Right.
want there's a real danger in not allowing people to read outside their own experience and
Yeah.
to find value in
Right. Well,
you
listen,
know
that's why they want to ban books, right?
right
And I think, like, now don't get me wrong, everybody. Like, Sarah, still, there's like kind of some judgment there for sure. But I also
yeah
think that's appropriate. Like, I think this is the part of like, it is in that sense, like a historical, like, I think there's a lot of ways in which, like, the thing about historical romance is like, you're really showing people who are of their time, right? And so,
hmm
yes, Sarah is doing that. We as readers can sort of see like the power of what she's doing, even though we're also like, you didn't have to kill Matilda off, right? Or whatever,
like
right?
you shouldn't have to be like on the precipice like
She
pulling
doesn't
the
have to be
Javert
jumping off the bridge. But you know
right
what? At the time, that is the way books were written. And I think like one of the things we have to think about is like, I think for me, then it's like, what are the ways that I have those same like urges towards
hmm
I don't know, like like respectability, right? Or
yeah
like sort of, and I think like there's a lot of ways in which we see that. Like there's like an ongoing conversation in romance itself, right? Like why is it that there's like, either no conflict, books with absolutely no conflict, right? He's just
right
been in love with her all along, but even the books where he's a serial killer, like, come on, right? Like, that's not
yeah
real. That's not real. One of the funniest, I saw this on Threads and I was really laughing. And it was somebody who said, when you're reading books by Jean-Paul Jay, who writes like a lot of sort of like crime kind of romances,
yeah
you're like, okay, I could live this life of crime. And then you read books by S.A. Cosby and you realize you are not ready for that life. And I was like, it's true though, right? Like there's a way in which crime and romance is always sort of I mean, it's not real, right? This is not
right
real crime. And I think that it's like right, like the ravages of gambling it's not real in any way. Sarah shooting this
right
guy, right, is not real in any way. And I think that's because essentially it's romance is like strictly only in some ways interested in I don't know, like kind of people changing for the better. And then like if you
hmm
can't or not capable of that, you can be a character in a book, but like it's not like a deep interest of romance is to explore people who are not willing to, I mean like
right
Joyce essentially or her husband just become,
right
sort of flatly villainous. Like we can feel empathy for them, but we aren't really going to explore what it would take to really have Joyce turn her life around, or what,
Right.
like it's just kind of like, well, that's romance is about like people who can move on.
Right.
And it's fine.
Which is funny about Joyce because I mean, I knew that I like the first time I read this book, that I came out of it being like, okay, Joyce is a villain. Like I'm
Hmm.
not a fan of Joyce. But for maybe like the first 60%, I was kind of like, I'm kind of like I kind of like Joy. I'm like Joyce is
Hmm.
she's evil, she's a villain, but like I'm kind of like digging like she's like a Disney villain. She's like
Hmm.
glamorously villainous.
Right.
And
She's
then she
Cruella de
turns
Vil,
her
right?
her
Yes.
villainy on Sarah, and that's when
Yeah.
I was like as long as you were only hurting men, I don't care. But like the moment that
Fair.
you go after my girl Sarah,
Fair.
like
Fair.
then I'm not you. But there was like a good chunk of the book where I was kind of
Yeah.
like, what, it would be interesting to see Joyce's happily ever after.
Right.
Like
Right. Right. Yeah. So I mean, it is like I think that that's the part. This question of like empathy. I think it's one that I think it's a real double-edged sword. I mean, if I'm being honest, and I think part of it is because if you read with an open mind and an open heart, and you read widely, you're willing to just like read everything you want that sounds good or interesting, then I think you can like find empathy in like the human condition, right? And even Derek
Mhm.
says this. I mean, he says something really interesting at some point, basically about like your life is just what makes you you, right? Like
Right.
we are all a product of our experiences. It's not nature
Right.
versus nurture. It's just nurture, like what happened or
Right.
didn't. But I also think like the double-edged sword of it is that if you are only then willing to read about people like you, right? I'm only going to read books about white people. I'm only going to read books about straight
Yeah.
people. I'm only going to read books about, whatever. Then it can also be instead just like, I don't know, confirmation bias, right? The whole world thinks like me.
Right.
Everyone in the book, right? Everyone in the world is the way I think, right? And that I think is, I don't know. I like have some mixed feelings about that too. I don't think that reading should be like prescriptive. I don't think, listen, I read because I think it's fun,
Yeah.
right? No one puts that pressure on like TV. Maybe they do. Maybe people put that pressure on TV shows and movies and stuff, right? If I was just like more entrenched in like
Yeah.
sort of like the narrative conversation around
Right.
movies or whatever. But I do think that in romance, especially, you can get right. That's the danger of, well, publishers saying, well, I didn't pick this book because I couldn't empathize with these characters,
Right.
right? I mean, so
Right.
empathy is both, a blessing and a curse in some ways in romance. And I think that it's taken me a long time to sort of be able to say that, right? I always use sort of kind of, this is a net good. You can be more empathetic if you're a reader, but like,
Mhm.
what if you're just empathizing with the idea that everybody in the world thinks like you? Then that seems bad, right?
Maybe let's take a step back.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
One thing I wanted to talk about was so there's a ball scene.
Yes.
And maybe especially because I just finished watching Bridgerton and that's the Cinderella plot line,
Yeah.
like there were like Cinderella elements,
Oh,
Sarah
yeah.
gets the makeover and Lily and
Yes.
Worthy are her fairy godmothers
Right.
and she
Right.
goes to the ball and we have, romance psychology where a mask is hiding your full identity.
Put on a mask and no one show your tits. No one will recognize you.
Right,
That's literally all it
exactly.
takes.
You know what? Fine. You know what? I'm willing.
Sure.
Um, there's true miracles that a spectacular pair of tits can like do
Yes.
in the world. And then so she's here, she's at the masquerade. Her and Derek
Oh, yeah.
almost go all the way.
Hmm.
Derek like smells her and
Oh,
realizes
yeah.
that it's her, which is also like romance science. But then like it immediately devolves like the situation falls apart, like Derek like kicks her out, she
Hmm.
leaves, she's going with Ivo
Yeah.
Jenner,
Right.
and then there's a mob and then Ivo Jenner abandons her and then she's like encounters these gentlemen who almost sexually assault her and then
Right.
like Derek has to rescue her. And there was a part of me that wondered, that felt that like that sequence
Hmm.
sort of followed similar to Matilda and like this era's like morality
Yes. Right.
tales,
Yes.
of like, okay, Sarah like took this risk and put herself out there and almost,
Mm.
quote unquote, gave away her virginity. And
And then she's
look
gonna be
how the
punished for
world
it or
fell
whatever. Yeah.
apart. Yeah, right after
Mm.
that. And I don't know that that was like Lisa's intention.
Sure. That's interesting. Yeah. I think, let me say before we talk about that, 'cause let me think about it for a minute. One of my favorite things about that scene is she like gets in there, like, right, she makes it past the doorman who thinks she's Matilda.
Yeah.
And then she like walks up to Worthy and kind of, he's like, welcome to Craven's. And she's sort of like, what are we looking at? And he's like, Miss Fielding. And then, he gets like, Gil, who's like one of the men to kind of, and he's like, you just keep Derek Craven away from her. Like this will ruin fucking everything. Like this small woman has the power
Yeah.
to destroy it all. And I think like that to me is really more where I often like sort of date the idea of like destruction is to this idea, right? That Craven's is like this essentially complete fairy tale that like Derek Craven
Yeah.
has made for himself. Right.
Yeah.
Everything is like gilded. There's like it's all about this like gambling and excess and
Yeah.
right. But he has found wealth there, but he has not found, and he's found security there. But the
Hmm.
one thing that he has not found there is happiness.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I often think of because even though it doesn't happen right there, this portends the destruction of Craven's at the end, where Joyce
Right.
comes and like literally burns it down. And so to me, I always think instead that like it's that moment with Worthy where what he's saying is like the threat that she is to Derek Craven is that like she could make him forget everything he has built because of her. And
Hmm.
so but I mean, I guess I could see like the morality kind of play aspect to it, but like it's also interesting because time and time again, he saves her, right?
Yeah.
Even from threats that essentially inadvertently he sicked on her, right? Like Joyce,
Right.
right? And Joyce essentially wants, is obsessed with Derek and wants him for herself. He has, they were lovers and he sort of was like,
Yeah.
it's over now, and she figures out that he's in love with Sarah, and then it's really actually terrible at this house party, like essentially
Yeah.
sends a man up to assault her, and Derek saves her from that. And then Derek essentially at the end, right, like she is Joyce sets fire to Craven's and like basically forces Sarah out at gunpoint, and he thinks
Hmm.
she's dead, right? Like, and Craven's is gone. And I think
Yeah.
the thing for me is like it's those scenes, the masquerade and then like the fire at the end, that are kind of again like sort of foils for each other, right? Like
Yeah.
had she really destroyed everything that night, like at that point at the masquerade, Derek is still not willing to like take a chance on her.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, I'm not good enough for you. Right. We're not going to do this. Now that I know who you are, I can't risk everything for you.
Yeah.
Right. It's not worth it. I'm going to hurt you. It's going to hurt me. So, no. So she takes off with Ivo Jenner. Right. And then at the end, when the same thing happens, right? Joyce takes her away and everything in Craven's is destroyed. He does not care at all.
Yeah.
Right. Because all he wants is Sarah back. None of
Yeah.
that matters. And he didn't know that in the middle of the book,
Yeah.
right? He only knows it at the end.
Yeah. And it's a great answer to when Sarah is asking to like shout out his club or whatever. And he's like, well,
Yeah.
what will you give me? I never
Yes.
do something for nothing.
Right. Right.
And you're like, okay, well, that means he's got to give it all up. He's got to
Right.
give everything up
Right.
for her
Correct.
because she's everything. She's not just
Right.
something, she's everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's interesting because I don't think that, I mean, if anything, I guess I do feel like it's really an interesting question. Like, right? Like the thing about Matilda is they are kind of these like not Victorian Regency, like morality
Yeah.
plays at some level, right? It's really clear that like Sarah has like deep empathy for them as people and understands what made them, but also feels that like by the end of the book, they should like get on the straight and narrow. Like, right? Like you've lived outside of society for too long. Welcome back in. And you know what? Like that is kind of what happens to Derek at the end, right? He is building
Hmm.
charity hospitals and literally partaking of mother's milk at the end, right? Because he is just like not, but what he's made is a family, right?
Hmm.
His own flesh and blood. And again,
Yeah.
these are deeply conservative, like again, small c conservative ideas that like the real place of happiness, if you would allow yourself to feel it, is in your interpersonal relationships with people that
Yeah.
love you, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not just, I mean, obviously in romance, that's often about like a romantic
Right.
relationship, but like
Right.
he is just as thrilled with like Worthy and just as happy with Lily and Alex and right, like he return. I mean, at one point after he thinks Sarah's dead, everybody, and he is devastated, and
He
it's
has to be
great.
knocked out to be
Yes,
prevented from like running into the burning building first. Like,
it is amazing, right? It really is.
perfect.
And he wakes up at Rainsford House or whatever and
Yeah.
kind of takes off and Lily goes after him and Alex is like he'll be back. Where else does he have to go?
Yeah.
Right? Where else does he have to go? And so I do think that like even though he thinks like I'm a man who's never loved, the way Worthy treats him, the way Lily and Alex treat him, right? That is clearly not true. He just couldn't ever like recognize that before,
Right.
right?
He's like, I don't have any feelings. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
There's that when he's making out with Sarah
Mm,
in the garden, and then
yeah.
he like breaks up with her once again.
Right.
He's like, if I could cry, I'd be crying right now, but I'm not capable of
I'm a
tears.
man. I'm a man. Yeah. No, it's
I've
great.
never felt a single feeling.
Never felt a single feeling until the entire casino burned down. My literal life's
Yeah,
work and all my money, and I did not care
I
at
don't
all.
care.
None of it mattered. Yeah.
I do think it's interesting, and I had this thought just now, just like as you were talking, as you were like describing the foil of like Joyce leading
Hmm.
Sarah away. The fact that Joyce is the one that burns Cravens down, and
Yeah.
this is ultimately shown to be a good thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That he's finally like detached himself from Cravens, and that
Yeah.
it's Joyce that does it for him, that like cuts the cord.
Yeah.
And it does kind of create this sort of partnership, I guess, between Joyce and Sarah in terms of how they're sort of both instrumental in
Right.
furthering Derek's journey, because like Sarah would never burn down Cravens. Like
No.
she does not have the violence in her to burn
No.
down
No.
Cravens.
Right. Right.
And Joyce in some ways like does what needs to be done. I mean, she does it for selfish reasons, but like
Right.
she does what needs to be done, and then Sarah provides the soft landing for
Right.
Derek to come
Right.
to
Right.
once that
Right.
happens.
Yeah. I mean, and it is. It's like really interesting the ways in which like what he gains with Sarah, right, is all of the things like he, right, of course, right, this is how it has to work, right? Like what can you give Derek Craven, the man who has everything? A
Right.
family. A
Yeah.
family. Right? And so when he comes, I mean, one of my favorite scenes is when they arrive at her family's cottage, right? Of their like literal elderly parents, and he can't, he has to like, it's the cottage, but
He's too
Sarah and Derek,
large.
right? He's too large. He has to like, like bring his head down a little bit. I'm like making a really funny gesture.
Yeah.
And he's like gonna ask his father for her hand in marriage.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like then Perry shows up and he has to, like be
Fucking
like,
Perry.
what the hell is he doing here? Right? Like, why is he talking about insatiable lust? And her parents are like, what is going on? It's great. I just think it's
It's
great. And
great.
he's just never had that, right? Like imagine what it would mean to a man like Derek Craven to have parents to take care of, right?
Yeah.
And then he's like, I want
He
to buy
does
them a
take care of
house.
them. Right. He builds them a new house.
Right. I'm going to make sure that they have like a maid and someone to do the work and, a carriage and horses so that they can, get to London when they need to
Yeah.
see you. And it's really something, again, very much the opposite of Perry and his mother, right?
Hmm.
Where Perry's mom is I mean, listen,
A hashtag boy mom,
yeah.
basically, you know.
To say the least, right? To say the least. And yet, Perry cannot see the ways that his mother is like controlling and possessive and would make Sarah's life miserable. But here we then have her parents who are like, we just want her to be happy. And if that
Mhm.
means you, that's fine. And we have some ideas about what that might look like. But, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, he's like, it is our job to then like keep them safe and secure and make them happy. And that's not moving them to London. They're going to stay in Greenwood
Right.
Corners,
Right.
right? But where it's going to be a nicer house. They're going to have people to take care of
It's going to
them.
be bigger than Perry's house.
It's going to
That's
be
the most
bigger than
important part.
Perry's house, right? Even that question of like parents is kind of an interesting one, right?
Yeah. And her parents are also, I think it's Sarah, like her dad, once, because Sarah keeps like jumping in on Derek and her
Oh
dad's
yeah.
conversation. And Derek's like, can I have some really thinly sliced toast, babe? Like, please. Like, and Sarah's like,
Mhm.
I know what you're doing. But then her dad is like, listen, we had her later in life.
Yeah.
And maybe if we had her 15 years earlier, it would be different, but it's not. And we had to
Yeah.
raise her to be her own person. And like,
Yeah. Right.
everything, all these little details kind of tie together
Yeah.
to make
Yes.
Sarah like
Who she is.
the soulmate
Yeah. Yeah.
to Derek.
And I just found, it's funny because I think this is like one of the first times I read the book where I really was like tuned into Sarah for whatever reason, right?
Mhm.
Because, and I think it really is because what she was fighting against at every sort of step of the way was this idea that, like, because she was a woman, the world got to tell her how to act. And
Yeah.
the return of like these, like the very hardcore return of these forces in women's lives, right? Like, well, your job is going to just be to have kids and to like
Right.
make my mother happy and to, you're certainly not going to write. You're certainly not going to have your own interests or your own
Right.
ideas about how the world should work and your place in it, right?
Yeah.
And so I found myself feeling really, I don't know, very interested in Sarah this time around. And I think
Yeah.
often when I read this book,
Derek
it's
all the
it's
time.
Derek's book, right? And now I'm like, oh no, it really is Sarah's book in a really
A
great
really
way.
good way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's this one thing that I sort of the last like main thing that I wanted to talk about was how this book breaks one of the what we consider like biggest romance rules, at least in like modern romance, which is, I mean, two
Oh
parts.
yeah.
Like one, they spend more than like 5 pages,
Hmm.
not together. And B, Derek sleeps with someone else.
Yes.
But something that was so interesting to me, because so listener, he sleeps with one of the house wenches, Tabitha, and Tabitha
Now it's
comes to
interesting
visit.
because there are people who will be like, no, that's not what she's saying happened. But everybody,
Oh,
I
I
feel
think he
very
did.
clear that that's what
Yeah.
happened. But it
Yeah.
is also written in a way, just like Matilda on the bridge at the end, that I suppose if you want to have that. But
One
I think
could,
you and
yeah.
I are of the opinion that he definitely fucked this lady.
He
Yeah.
slept. But he
Yeah.
fucked with her, calling her Sarah the whole like
Yes.
basically pretending that
Pretending to be
she
her.
was
Yeah.
Sarah because like they look a little bit alike. And
Yeah.
Tabitha comes to Sarah. She's like, "Listen, I'm visiting my parents in the neighboring village, but I just had to stop by and let you know that Derek
Yes.
is miserable and also he fucked me pretending that
Yes.
I was you." But then, and so like it's really interesting that like Derek fucks another person to try to remember Sarah, but
Yeah.
then Sarah, after hearing this, immediately goes and tries to have sex with Perry because they're
Yes.
engaged at this point. So
Right.
she goes to try to have sex to forget, whereas Derek was trying to do it
To
to
remember.
remember. And yeah, it's this like really interesting immediate juxtaposition. Like it's not
Yes.
Lisa's not subtle at all about,
Right.
you know,
What's
what
going
she's
on
trying to
there?
say here. Yeah.
Well, and that's why I think at the end of the day, I do have a hard time believing that like Lisa Kleypas would be like essentially shaming Sarah for like almost losing her virginity at Craven's
Yeah.
because I think like one of the things that romance believes, right, is that like sexual intercourse with a person you want to have sex with, regardless of whether or not you are in love, regardless of whether or not, right, this person is good for you or whatever, whatever else. If you want to do it, You
Yeah.
should do it and you should have a good time.
Yeah.
Right. And I think part of the reason we understand that she would never be happy with Perry is that
Yeah.
he's so steeped in this idea that like sex is bad. Right. And
Yeah.
that she's being kind of forward and slutty essentially for wanting to like
Yeah.
kiss him too forward. How dare you? You
Hmm.
really, what did you do? You went off to the, and your hanging out with these like sex workers has made you yourself a
Yeah.
bad person in some way.
Yeah.
And so it is really interesting because it, in some ways, like really is what breaks, finally makes Sarah realize, like, I have changed. I mean, he's basically like, what happened to you? You never
Right.
would have acted this way. And I think that there's this moment where he's trying to shame her into acting the right way. And
Right.
instead, she's like, you know what? He's right. I have changed. I am different. And I cannot be with this man and live with I mean, he wants to live with his mom.
Right.
And this is really it's a bad deal. It's bad. It's really bad.
Sarah's like, no.
Yeah. And
Just
says
like,
too, like, right, like at one point there's this great line essentially that's like, she realized that there was probably something wrong with them that they don't ever talk about the future,
yeah.
right? That is like a real sign that something is wrong in your relationship if the future and what it holds for both of you is so painful that neither of you want to ever
Right.
mention it, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even as they're planning their wedding, she's
Right.
like,
Right. Tarek they have not had sex at that point, but like she's
no.
kissed him and they've made out and it was fucking great and she was into it,
Yeah.
right? And so she knows that something is like missing if she and Perry cannot have that.
Right. Derek's ruined her for all men.
Obviously.
And she's ruined him for all women. You know,
Also true.
like there's, he doesn't even look at anyone else.
Yeah. He can't. He has to be out there with the lights out with, I think her name's Tabitha.
Yeah.
Right.
Tabitha calling her Sarah.
What a pathetic little guy.
He's such,
What a pathetic
he's
little
such,
guy.
he's a loser, like parentheses affectionate. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Complimentary for sure.
Complimentary. Like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the things is like, it's really interesting. I think another thing that I found myself thinking about is like in the modern state of romance, one of the things I find contemporary romance is kind of plagued with like a kind of setup that I find it really hard. I need a lot
mhm.
of one of the things I believe is that like interpersonal relationships are just like
Yeah.
naturally filled with tension,
Right.
right? People don't always see eye to eye. The people you love don't always see eye to eye. You can want different things or want the
Yeah.
same thing but think it should be done in a different way. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the things is like romance is like a way to really like dive into what those how people are different and then like what happens next. And so there's a kind of contemporary romance that's really popular right now where essentially like he's especially in like MF romance, right? So
Yeah.
he's just been into her all along. And all he wants is to make her happy. And all he wants is to, just give her everything she wants. And I found myself thinking, like, okay, that's pretty much true for Derek Craven. But so
Yeah.
what makes it different, right? What makes it not boring? And I think part of it is that he finds something, the tension of like wanting to give her everything when all he has wanted up until this point is to give himself everything is
Yeah.
something that he cannot like sit with. There's a lot of tension in him in terms of like, well, what is that going to really mean again for like my future or our future? What am I going to have to give up? What is she going to demand or ask of me? Right.
Yeah.
Once she finds out how down bad I am for her, could she potentially take advantage of it? Can I trust her or this
Right.
feeling? Right. And so
Yeah.
even though we understand that he is down bad, right? Down
Just
real
absolutely
bad,
pathetic.
right? There's never a point where he is not absolutely fighting against that with everything in him. And
Yeah.
I think that is true in some way. If you are happy and comfortable in your life, and then you meet someone and you fall in love with them, now your happy, comfortable life is probably going to be challenged in significant ways. whatever
Right.
that is.
Right.
And I think that like a romance where someone is down bad, but just like, don't worry, I will just do everything you want is like, well, I'm like, well, that seems bad to me,
Right.
right? I don't want a person who's willing to just, I don't want like self-sacrifice, right? I want
Right.
us to kind of fight through some new thing together. And so I did also find myself thinking a lot about that, right? Like Derek is pretty much, these two are obsessed with each other from the beginning, but there's
Hmm.
enough impediments, kind of external impediments, but then also these very profound ones about like, for Sarah, what would it mean to really exist that far out of society?
Hmm.
Right. And, I was always going to go back to Greenwood Corner. So now I have to really rethink, everything about my life in that way. But for Derek, it's like, do I have to really give up everything for this woman? What's that going to mean? She's not going to
Yeah.
let me run a gambling club. She's not going to let me,
Yeah.
you know, do these things. And so that was also kind of interesting to think about, right? Like, how do you still create a very tension filled book with people who, from the minute they meet, are like fighting not to be together, but like to stay apart?
Yeah. They're like two magnets, you
Right?
know?
Exactly. And they're
Yeah.
like, I know that we will click together, but let's make sure that never fucking happens. As opposed to, somebody just like being willing to sort of put everything they think is important on the line. Like, right? Like, I'm willing to give up all of that as long as I can have you. Well, I will be interested. I'm going to say something really, I don't want that person.
Mhm.
I want you to have a life for yourself. I don't want to be your
Right.
life. Right.
Right.
And so those kinds of stories to me are more sad than like sort of personally or intellectually or even feelings wise fulfilling because
Hmm.
I have found the people in my life who have given up everything for the other person that that doesn't work. That doesn't
Yeah.
work, right? That is not like a, and I'm not saying like romances again should be about healthy relationships. I mean, but I do
The
think
last thing.
there's still like models for like thinking about what does it mean, right? What does it mean to be in a relationship or be
Yeah.
so?
Just one thing I think Lisa Kleypas does really well is in so many of her books that we get, she spends so much time on the marriage itself,
Yes.
on establish
Yeah.
on like this you like you were saying, this is how you adjust to
Yeah.
sharing your life with another person, and here are the growing pains, and here are the ways that
Yes.
you grow apart and then come back together
Yeah.
in this marriage. Like so many of her books
Yeah, it's true. It's
have such
true.
like a meaty aftermath
Part
to
where they're kind of
marriage.
together already,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah, this is also a real classic. Like, I'd sort of forgotten this too. Like, again, an old school romance, like, you knew that the happily ever after had arrived when a man could finally say, I love you,
Yeah.
right? Because they could never fucking say, I love you, ever, right?
Because they don't
God
have any feel. They
forbid.
have a single feeling, you know?
Yes, right. It's anger. That's what it is, right? And so for them to sort of be able to say, and like, there's even a whole part where Sarah's like, I know you're not going to be able to say it to me, but I know you
It's
feel it.
okay.
And
Yeah.
then, in the devastated ruins of his casino,
He's like holding, he thinks she's a ghost. He's like,
yeah, it's so good. And then he's like, I love you. I'm just going to never say anything else. I'm like, great. That's what I
as it,
want,
exactly.
as it
Right.
should be, as
Right.
it should be.
He's
Oh,
literally, we say we like men to suffer. We want them to like crawl through burning coals. And he
yes.
literally does.
He literally does.
He
Yes.
literally does.
Yeah. There's this one great line, like right when everyone thinks Sarah's dead, because it takes a couple days for her to like kind of make her way back because Joyce has
Yeah.
kidnapped her. Is Lily and Alex are talking about him, and one of them says, and I think it's Alex. It's interesting. Alex is kind of far more like Lily's just like, what is happening? I can't handle how he's feeling. And Alex
Hmm.
is like, he has survived everything. He will be able to survive this too. And there's a way in which like that is true, right? Like we know that like Derek Craven is a survivor. And
Hmm.
at that moment, he's really like, I think I'm being tested in this terrible way. Nothing has ever turned out for me. And so when she
Right.
reappears, it's just, the opposite of, Sarah trying to say to Perry, like, we've wasted years. Like, right? Why would you ever waste a minute of like love that
Right.
you have with another person? And I think like Derek doesn't quite get that until, he thinks she's dead. And then
until he's forced to.
yeah, right.
The universe is like, okay, fine. All right.
Fine, you
Fine.
idiot.
I guess what I'm gonna have to do. A literal act of God.
A
Like, fine.
literal act of God. Let me burn this entire fucking thing down. Yeah.
Burn this to the
Amazing.
ground.
A plus. Hmm. I did love it though. I loved it. It was great to reread it. It was very fun. And I was kind of like, I'll just skim. And then no.
No.
I
Yeah.
just fell right
There's
back
so
into
many
it.
times like I was listening to it on a walk yesterday and I'm like, my neighbors think I'm insane because I'm just like smiling ear to ear. I'm like the
Yes.
Joker. I'm just like cackling out loud. You have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm like, you don't understand. He just took her spectacles.
Yes, you have no idea. It's so great when she finds them in his jacket pocket. I mean, I think it's that all to me, it's all very deeply romantic, right? A lot of this book is.
Yeah. She's like, are you having a problem with your sight, Mr. Craven,
Oh,
or is it your heart?
I mean, I could tattoo that on my body probably.
Yeah.
We did a fun episode for Valentine's Day. It was like a dozen roses. We were just talking about
Yeah.
like characters named Rose or whatever. And Sarah had remembered, Sarah, my podcast partner, not Sarah in the book,
Yes.
that like the first time they have, like, first of all, her name's Sarah, S.R. Fielding is for Sarah Rose, like Rose is her middle name. But like
Yeah.
like throwing rose petals on the bed. And I was like, this
Yes.
fucking man, I cannot even. It's
He
perfect.
like sprinkles them all over
Yes.
her body. I was like,
Yes.
Derek, like who
Derek.
knew you had this in you?
Exactly. It's
He is a man
great.
of many layers.
Exactly.
He's like
Exactly.
Shrek. He's an onion. You know what I mean? There's just a lot of layers.
A lot of layers there at the
A
end.
lot
But
of
yeah, it is.
layers.
It's great. It really is. I was so thank you for having me on to talk about it because I was so happy to read it again.
Thank you so much for like it was all just because I was like, oh, I've never done a Dreaming of You
Yeah.
episode. And you were like, there's always time. And I was like, wait.
Here we are, and here we are.
Yeah. And we even got to talk about Reacher. So
See, perfect. It was
it
perfect.
all
Reacher
comes.
is like I mean, one of the things I like about Reacher, I will just say, like, is to me is like the anti-romance. Like, there is a
Yeah.
man who doesn't think who doesn't think that he has feelings, and you know what? He's right. He does not.
That's true.
And I'm fine with that. I don't want Reacher having feelings. I just want Reacher to kick ass, and that's it. Like, it's
He's a
okay.
large man and he's a large man and he doesn't have a single possession besides a toothbrush.
No, and a debit card, it's fine.
Right. And that's it. And
And
maybe sometimes he has a flip phone and that's all. Like,
that's it. Even though that's kind of recent. I don't even know, right? The recent ones. He's still trying to live an off the grid life in our
yeah,
modern
you know
world.
what? Good for him. If I were a man, maybe I'd do that. Maybe I'd do it too.
Perfect.
All right.
Perfect.
Jen, one last question.
Yes.
What was the last book that made you want to stay up all night reading? Besides this, not this one.
Mm. You know, okay, so I will say, let me look. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to have to look because I don't remember the titles of anything.
Fair.
I did find like a mafia romance kind of series I
Mm.
kind of liked. I will read those. I feel like one of the like the to me the opposite of the opposite of the like he's just been into her all along are these like mafia romances like again where it's like whatever, right? And I didn't like all the books of the series, but the series is by Lilith Vincent. And
Okay.
the first one I think was called like, I don't know, Brutal Intentions or something like that.
Something, yeah.
Something like that, right? And you know what? I had a nice time reading. But yeah, I feel like I read essentially like a bunch of mafia romances by this
Yeah.
author last week. And I don't know if this is the one that I read, but I did. The other author that I have read a lot of recently that we kind of recently discovered is an author named Julia Wolf. And
Mm.
she has written, there's a series. One is called like, we just did an episode on it. I think it's called like
Yeah, I think I just
Sincerely
listened to that.
Your Inconvenient Wife.
Yeah.
And like that series was really good. I think just like very, again, I think it has some KLEYPAS elements that there's like a lot of like external plot sort of wrapping things up and a lot of drama that way. But I think that can be kind of nice. So I also like that series. So I don't know. I'm
Mhm.
just kind of, I'm trying it. But yeah, I will
Yeah.
admit that one Lilith Vincent book had me up all night and I'm not sure I remember which one it is, but
Okay. All right, Jen, before I let you go, where can listeners find you?
Oh, yeah. So I'm the co-host of the Fated Mates podcast, and that's where you can listen to us every week. We release like 50 episodes a year. So
Hmm.
you can find me there, and it's in our eighth season. So there's a lot of episodes for you to listen to there. And then I mostly post, I would say, like serious things on Blue Sky,
Hmm.
as Jen reads romance. And then occasionally on Threads, I would say mostly my profile there is like shit posting. Or if I'm on Threads, I like to talk about the WNBA, which is something I really also enjoy very much. So
Yeah.
that's it.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
It was my pleasure.
And listener, as always, this is Allison Finch. You can follow me at the Allison Finch. You can follow the podcast at We Read It One Night. Email me, we read it one night at gmail.com. For any deep dives, books, authors, guests that you would like to, as a listener suggestion, I always prioritize those. So let me know and support the podcast by leaving a rating and review wherever you're listening. And if you have a little bit of extra room in your budget this month, then you can also visit my Etsy shop. You buy a book through the bookshop.org affiliate link in the description of this episode, or buy me a coffee. Again, all linked in the show notes. Godspeed, comrades.